Yo guys, this is Razun, and I finally had the time and energy to make the Frost DK guide there were so many people were asking for. Took me way longer than expected to finish this. Turns out I'm also bad at leaving out some of the details to make it short sometimes. Forgive me if it's too long, but I will try to add timestamps to the video so you can skip around. These are the points I'm going to talk about, and if you're like searching for only talents or something, you can skip through the video and maybe come back if you're searching for something else and skip through the parts. In the end, I think it's better to make one compact long guide including everything you need instead of making, like, let's say 5 different videos about 5 different topics. Hopefully this is still useful to some of you in the last weeks or even month of the season, and then we got a very long season 8 coming, so there will still be a lot of time to play Frost DK. But now let me start with the first point. Why should you even play Frost DK? It is a spec that is of course living in Unholy Decay's shadow a bit, but to be fair, that's also one of the reasons why it's often overlooked as a spec. It's still a strong spec, it's just that Unholy is so much more prevalent and solid in the end because of its survivability and anti-magic tool, that Frost is outshined basically, and not many people are willing to play this. But what's most important for me, it's more fun in the first place to play, because you're not gonna have so much long games, you're gonna be more of a glass cannon with Frost. Because, as I said, you don't have all these survivability tools Unholy has. And in the end, this will also result in you having way shorter games to play, as if you were, let's say you play with a healer. If you were to play Holy Power DK, you will have way longer and a lot of draws. And with Frost, you will have faster games. And if this is more fun for you, then that's already one point why Frost could be for you. On top of that, I mean, of course, Unholy is favorite in most of matchups compared to Frost in like 80% or even more. There is a few matchups where Frost DK is actually better in my opinion. Let's say Ellie Holy Power, for example, where you would have 0 chance with Unholy DK if you play with a healer, at least with a Holy Power. But it's still same for Disc Priest. If you play Disc Priest Unholy DK, you're gonna have a pain matchup into any Shaman healer or like Shaman Prot Power as Shaman, all the same. And I like to face these comps with Frost. It's at least like, I don't know, maybe 50-50, maybe a bit less, but you still have a good chance of winning the game. Then there's a few like niche stuff, of course. If you would face Prot Warrior, Hipala, for example, it's also really pain with Unholy because he's reflecting your calls. These are a few examples where Frost is actually better than Unholy. Most of the time this is not the case overall in the ladder. I have to be really honest here. Against certain comps like Mage Rogue, Shadow Priest Mage, Shadow Priest Rogue, mostly against the RP classes, you will definitely have a way harder time to secure the win as Frost compared to Unholy. While with Unholy you can just face with a keyboard most of the time and secure the win. If you're playing with a Parla, you will find it quite challenging to win with Frost and maybe lose a lot of games against decent players. Your reward therefore would be that you're not stuck in these painful long matchups when you're facing Lock Holy Parla, maybe even also Warrior Holy Parla, Ellie Holy Parla, etc. And another reward is your damage feels way more satisfying in my opinion. You're going to do a lot of direct damage and have crits on the screen and not passive damage from your Gargoyle, for example. So that's one of the main reasons why it's also more fun to play. You will just have to decide for yourself, is it worth for you to maybe lose against some of these players? Who knows, maybe the Shadow Priest Rogue players and Mage players are not going to hate you as much if you feed them a few games with Frost. Could be also that they're just whispering you, "Means, how do you lose DK Pala?" while not even realizing that you're on a different spec. We never know. It's like classic community is pretty toxic. In the end you should decide for yourself. Nothing stops you from going back to Unholy if the queues are getting too bad for Frost. But it's always nice to have a decent alternative in my opinion. Frost DK was considered a counter to Holy Power Warrior on private servers. In Classic that's not really the case. I will talk about this more in detail later, why this is not the case on Classic, because some of the mechanics work differently here. I would still say Frost is heavily undervalued as a spec just because Unholy DK is so prevalent. If you play with a double DPS, of course you should play Unholy because of the survivability. But if you're playing with a Holy Power, it's definitely a decent comp to push even towards Gladiator maybe. Rank 1 is going to be extremely tough, even as Unholy this season, except if you're playing with a Preg maybe. And when I'm playing Classic, to be honest, I mostly mix in Unholy just when the queues are getting too annoying. Like there's so many Shatter and Shadow Priest teams where Frost is sometimes you lose the fun when you play only Frost. So I never play Frost exclusively, but I like to do it as much as possible, especially when I get bored of all these long Unholy games. And on private server I got rank 1 playing Frost exclusively, but there was way less competition, so that doesn't really count. I would still say it's a hard challenge to get Gladiator with Frost, but I think it's possible. And there was 1 or 2 other DKs I think who have done this even with Frost. So if you like a challenge and if these are some of the reasons applying to you, I can heavily recommend you to play Frost if you just want to be a glass cannon and have some fun and blast some people. 2 more points I forgot to mention. If you like playing off-meta specs in general and of course and like to be a sleeper kinda, then of course it can be an advantage to be kind of an unknown spec and people maybe not know what to do against it, and you're gonna have this surprise adventure, so to say, especially at low ranks, but maybe also at high ranks. Can be fun for a lot of people. And lastly, one more reason why it could be worth to pick up Frost now is next season there's gonna be Bauble Trinket, which is gonna ruin the fun for DKs a lot. And I really mean a lot. It can be really downer because DK is such a burst heavy class, no matter which spec you're playing. And you don't have Mortal Strike, so Bauble might ruin your complete burst window. And I'm not saying Frost is gonna be better than Unholy, but I like to have a 10-second CC tool we have with our freeze to maybe give us more chance to reduce the effect of Bauble a bit. I could be coping a bit with this, but when I played on AT back then, there was also Bauble, and it never bothered me that much on Frost DK when I had insane CC and Lich King heroic weapons. So maybe just another thing to look out for. Or in other words, DK is going to become a lot of weaker in the season with Bauble. So you might as well have some fun with Frost Spec if it's your thing. Before I move on, I feel like the guide is going to be pretty detailed and long already, so I'm not going to try to include too much general stuff and be pretty specific about Frost DK. And as for the gear, I've done a quick guide already about Season 7 BiS Gear for Unholy as well as Frost DK. You can check it out if you're looking for the BiS Gear. I'll probably make a new video about Season 8 as well when it's time. And if you're seeing this video by Season 8, then it's obviously going to have changed a lot. So I think it's good to not include it in this. I can give you the stat priority really quick in case you want to compare items which are not BiS, or to give you the general idea what's behind the BiS list. You definitely want Spellbind Cap as well as Hit Cap. So your most crucial spells cannot miss in this case. For example, Strangulate is very important. If you don't have Spellbind Cap, you're going to resist Strangulate against Priest or Palas with Shadow Aura. With Hit, it's basically the same. 2% is already enough to give you the 5% minimum hit cap with your talents, which is kind of nice for us. And after that, it's definitely Strength and Resilience is your most important stats by far. Strength is what gives you damage, and for Resilience, it depends how high your Resilience already is. If you feel comfortable with your amount of Resilience, you should definitely be above 1k, possibly even above 1.1k in my opinion in this season, in Season 7 at least. And as for Season 8, probably same, at least 1.1. And if you feel you're not dying that easy, you can also go low Resilience and more Strength, but yeah, in general, these are your most important stats. And I could almost end it here honestly, because the other stats don't matter too much compared to Strength and Resilience. So you will just want to grab the PV items with highest amounts of Strength on them. Or if you're below 1k Resilience, you should just grab the Season 7 PvP off parts, which have high amounts of Resilience on them. I can briefly explain why the other off stats are not that important for Frost in PvP. As for crit, it's probably still your most useful off stats, because even though you have Killing Machine procs guaranteed on Frost Strike, you still maybe want your other attacks to crit, and also your non-Killing Machine Frost Strikes can be pretty juicy if you follow that up with a random crit not from Killing Machine. After that, I didn't even really bother putting them in a certain order. These off stats, as I said, don't worry too much about them. They all have small use, but nothing compared to Strength. If you have Overhit, it's actually not useless, so I put it also on the same level as the other stats, because you can counter like some talents, I think, or at least racials. You will have a higher chance to hit, and you will have a higher chance to hit also your auto attacks, which can generate maybe a bit more Killing Machine procs. It's like small amount, but Overhit is not useless for Frost DK in PvP, while it would be kind of useless for Unholy, I think. And then Expertise is basically the same. It kind of hurts if your Killing Machine proc gets dodged or played, because only the offhand will hit and you will lose a lot of damage, but you will never be able to get a perfect Expertise cap anyway. And on top of that, ideally you want to stand behind your enemy in PvP, which makes them not be able to dodge. And the majority of your burst is also going to hopefully happen in a stun. Then Expertise also becomes irrelevant, but it's still a nice stat to have. I also would say Expertise is better for Frost DK than for Unholy. You will generate a bit more Killing Machine procs from your increased auto attacks with haste, but nothing too special, because it doesn't reduce your global cooldown or your cast time like for other classes. You're an unrepresent, so you're kind of kept on global cooldown. and it's nice to have a bit of haste, but yeah, these stats are all pretty much not. You should just take the items with which the highest amount of strength, and then you take either expertise, haste, or like even hit. And ARP is basically the same. I put it a bit below these stats because I'm not too big of a fan of ARP at the moment, at least. And even in later seasons, I would not recommend to build an ARP build unless you want to have just fun and high obliterate crits. Then it can be okay, but as I will show you later, you're not gonna obliterate that much in PvP. Like, let's for example, disease get dispelled, then you will have to use your runes for disease again, and you cannot obliterate that much as in PvE. So it loses value compared to PvE. And the more up you have, the better it gets. So stacking a bit of up is not gonna do too much for you as Frosty K in PvP. And stamina is even less useful for Frosty K than for Unholy, because you don't even get the pet explode damage, which Unholy benefits from at least a bit, and you also don't want to draw your enemies, I guess, and you will have enough stamina from your PvP gear. And agility, it technically gives armor and crit chance, which sounds nice on paper, but yeah, we already get crit chance from Killing Machine, and on top of that, it's only for strikes and not for spells, so Holding Blast doesn't even profit from it. And the amount of armor is really low, so you're not gonna get a lot of attack power from it. The PvE items with agility also don't have resilience on them, so it's definitely not worth dropping the resilience for us. As for racials, on Hoarder side, it's Orc and Blood Elf. These are the best PvP racials, and Blood Elf being a bit better against casters, while Orc is better against everything else. And situationally, Blood Elf can be even better with the extra interrupt, so I would say these racials are both really good and on par. And 100% human is the best racial normally on Alliance side, especially in the last 2 seasons when you have big trinkets like Death Choice combined with Greatness or another ICC trinket later. There's no competition for human. Alright, let's look at the compositions you can actually play with Frosty K in Arena. First, in the 2v2 bracket, we have, of course, Holy Pala DK with Frost. I didn't put it in top tier, but it's still by far your best comp you can play as Frosty K. The synergy is just great. You not only have dispelled, you only have the Hodge, the stun on low cooldown, and Frost is kind of dependent on a stun also to burst and with Frost Strikes. Otherwise it might get dodged or parried. It's a really fun and strong comp. If people like drinking or rage drinking your Hungering Cold, they can insta get punished if your Pala times the Hodge perfectly. And if they repeat this mistake too often, you can pretty much win the game based off that. Frosty K is quite vulnerable, and Holy Pala is one of the strongest healer to definitely add to that vulnerability and maybe make you survive for long enough with Bob and stuff and Bubble, Big Sack. And yeah, it's a great comp. The only thing it misses kind of is an offensive purge, but if it would have an offensive purge, it would be probably S tier or like even too strong. And what is also decent is Disc Priest and Frosty K. I'm not sure if it's like on par with Unholy DK. Disc Priest probably not, because of its vulnerability to double DPS and casters in general. And you don't have to stun. Priest has the purge therefore, and also a dispel, which is kind of crucial, but you cannot stun enemies. You can only grip fear enemies, which can work out pretty well if you grip fear enemies and then freeze them on top, or the other way around. It's kind of similar to Hunter actually, where you freeze people with a frost trap and then Priest can run there, dispel people and fear them in peace. But I think it's quite a bit weaker than Holy Pala Frosty K. These are the only comps which have been played above 3k MMR. I've seen some Frosty K Disc Priest players and some Frosty K Holy Pala, but other comps I don't think there have been even like above 3k. So that's it for these 2 tiers, sadly. What I've played a bit is Frosty K Resolute. It is playable somehow, but of course it's weaker and a bit gimped. You don't have a dispel, and Frosty K is already not as self-sustainable as Unholy DK. What is kind of nice in this comp though is your Druid can run some sort of feral hybrid spec similar to TBC, where you probably ditch Insect Swarm, I think. I'm not too sure about that. I would have to ask her to do it again. But Insect Swarm is not that big because you don't have the magic damage increase like Unholy, and then you can just go full improve Bash spec, and then you have kind of a scuffed Hodge, so to say. It can also dodge the Bash, but you still have a stun, so I think it's playable, and I played this comp quite a bit with Frost. It's not a top tier comp by any means, but it's still a good fun if you don't have access to an Holy Palo or Disc Priest. Because either the Frosty K or the Residue is gonna die pretty sure, so you're not gonna have that long games. And otherwise you're gonna have enough damage and CC especially to close out the games, so it's a bit more fun than the draw type of comp with Unholy. And then for the last healer comp, And these are all healer comps, right? Because Frost Decay should ideally be played with a healer because you're just not self-sustainable enough. Is the Rescue Shaman. I think it's somewhat playable. I didn't play it too much actually, but on paper it sounds not nice, and I think in reality, I also have seen it, it's not really that great, because your freeze shares diminishing returns with Hex. You have a Purge offensive, which is kind of nice, but you have no Dispel again, and on top of that you don't even have a stun, and it's even, I think, less tankier than the rest of it. So I would still say it's somewhat playable, it's Frosty Healer, but I think it's definitely the worst out of the four. And then I would put Preg Parlor in the playable tier. Maybe it's even a bit better, I'm not too sure, I didn't play it a lot. It's definitely worse than the Unholy version of Preg Decay, that's for sure, because of the self-sustainability again, the anti-magic tools. It's a double DPS comp, right? And Unholy Decay also enhances Preg damage, the magic damage, and you don't have that as Frost. Your Repentance again shares same diminishing returns with your Frost Tomb, your Freeze. It's still playable because Preg is such a strong Preg, it makes everything playable basically. He just needs to watch out probably to not multi-dot too much because you want to CC enemies more in this comp. Hodging enemies and bursting them in Frost Strike is probably still good in this comp. But yeah, I don't think it has the survivability to be top tier or decent tier after all. And I would definitely, if you want to try hard, you should probably play still Unholy. Then it's an S tier comp actually, not only playable. Alright, Shadow Priest Frost Decay has actually been played a bit on AT back then, but it was very good players, and they did this I think to counter the Warp Hulls, because with Unholy they got crushed and didn't have enough CCs. Then again, different times, different servers, so I think it's still playable because Shadow Priest and Preg Parlor both have a bit of healing at least to make it a somewhat playable comp. It's definitely not as good as this I think with Frost Decay, but you could still probably have a decent rating with this comp if you just figure out some struts and synergy with the Fierce and Freeze and Grip and stuff. You just need to be careful that your Shadow Priest doesn't multi-dot too much like maybe in other comps, because then he's gonna break your CC again, which is why it's not as strong this comp. This was pretty much all the comps which I would even consider playing personally probably, unless you want to play some YOLO double DPS comps. I can show these real quick, don't take this too serious, it's like more of a skirmish level comp if we go below that even, and you can of course play Rogue Decay and Warrior Decay, same as Unholy. And I would advise you maybe to spec 1 point or a bit more points into Blood, so you have a bit more self-sustaining. As I showed in the tennis spec earlier, you can pretty much easily get 1 Blood tap point at least. It's of course not a super strong comp, you can probably destroy some Clothieth in this comp, same as with Unholy. Other than that, you can play this of course with a Hunter or another DK. And maybe a bit more self-sustainable, but still a YOLO comp after all is Enhanced Frost Decay and Prog Parlor Frost Decay. It's nothing which I would really consider like pushing any decent rating with, just for fun maybe with a friend, or if you want to practice, you have these comps which are borderline going into the skirmish level comps. But if you're playing, for example, let's say you would want to play Log Frost Decay. I'm gonna talk about 3v3 comps in a minute, but I think Destrolog Frost Decay can be some fun in 3s, and if you want to practice synergy with this, you could just go into the 2v2 and play it maybe up to 2k rating, or like, I don't know, I'm pretty sure I would, I don't know, I'm pretty sure I would get to like this rating for sure with a friend, but after that it gets rough, right? And you're gonna lose a lot of games because you're not a strong comp and no healing. But you can still play this, and Mage as well, it has some synergies at least, it's kind of playable for fun, but yeah, as I said, it's more in the skirmish tier. The first 4 comps are the only comps I would personally consider pushing some rating with, possibly to like towards 3k. But yeah, now we have an overview of what's even like considered to be playable with Frost, and what you can maybe have ideas now for what you can play with a friend as Frost DK. So we're moving on to the 3v3 tier, and now there's a lot of comps of course in 3v3, and I have played a lot of them but not all of them. Firstly, this is a really good comp. I think I've also seen it on high rating last season. If you play double healer Frost Decay with the Holy Pala and Disc Priest, you have the, when I was talking about 2v2, right, you're missing the Purge, and now we have double Dispel and a Purge, and Frost Decay brings kind of a lot of pump and CC, so I think you can not only dampen people with it, you can actually pump and CC and maybe even burn people with it. I think it's kind of viable comp and probably one of your best choices if you want to play 3s as a Frost Decay. And the advantage is it's not as boring as Unholy DK double healer in my opinion. You could also of course play this comp with a Red Pala and probably still have a solid comp, maybe 1 tier below that, I'm not sure, I didn't play it too much. But of course the Hodge and Frost Decay is still going to work with a Red Pala and added damage on it, and Disc Priest and backup as a healer. if you would play it with a Resto Shaman, I would probably definitely put it 1 tier below, because you don't have the W spell. Frost Decay is not as tanky, you're more vulnerable. You have the Purge and the Bloodlust, but I think Disc Priest, especially with the Fierce, is a better choice here, because your Hex is also going to be the art again with your Freeze. So, but yeah, these comps are both playable, I think. Probably work decently well with the Resto Shaman together with the Holy Pala. We just out heal and try to purge as much as possible. Maybe it's 1 tier below, I'm not too sure, but probably I should have put it 1 tier below also, to be honest. But yeah, what's also in this tier, and that could be actually a decent tier, is Enhance and Ellie Shaman. That's why it's probably, yeah, that's why I put it there. And I think Frost Decay, Enhance, Holy Pala can work out pretty well. The Enhancement Shaman doesn't have to worry that much about his win free anymore, and can probably ground more, or just even put Spell Totem probably. You're gonna pump a lot in this comp, and you have the Purge and Bloodlust on top with the Holy Pala, and it's probably a pretty decent comp. I'm not sure if it's in this tier, maybe it's in the tier below, if you play like a DPS Shaman with this, but I have played with Ellie Shaman a bit, and it was kind of fun. It was at least decent, I would say. And yeah, of course, other comps you can play are the classic comps UnRDK plays as well. I would say that Frost Decay is significantly weaker in both these comps, and not even like close to top tier. It's probably okay and decent tier. You can play PhD, of course, with a Hunter, and you're gonna have a lot of damage. You will have the DRs on the traps again, but to be honest, it's kind of hard to get traps for Hunter anyway, so I think the Hunter can just pump with your freeze on 1 minute cooldown, and possibly, like, if you don't get 1 and 3s, right, it's harder to land triple freeze, you can trap the other target, so I think it can be pretty okay. And the damage from this comp is actually going to be quite nutty. Even though you're not enhancing the magic damage like Unholy, and you will have a bit less survivability, I think this comp could work out pretty well, especially with a Mem Hunter, of course. If you would play with a Beastmaster Hunter, if it's even more of a YOLO comp, I would put it a bit lower tiers. But yeah, other than PhD, you can of course play TSG, but I would not recommend you play TSG with an Arms, because Arms just adds AoE bleeds with 1 Blade Storm, and then it's going to be definitely rough for you to get the freeze in. And Arms and Frost Decay are both pretty vulnerable to casters. So if you want to play Arms TSG, I definitely advise you to play Anno DK. You can still play it for fun and probably be in borderline B or A tier. But if you play with a Prot Warrior, I think it's a lot of fun. Some top tier players even played this in tournaments on AT. I don't think it's that strong, honestly, but it's definitely a fun comp to play. Maybe with ARP it is actually a top tier comp. It's hard to judge this right now, but it's definitely a fun comp, and you will have a lot of stuns to get your burst in as your melee burst, right? Frost Decay profits a lot from stuns. So this comp, I would like to play this comp actually. It looks like a fun comp, and I played it a few times and it was always a blast. And yeah, if you have a Prot Warrior, go for it, it's a good comp. Then this could also be a fun comp, I think. 2 DKs and a Holy Pala, and one of them is Frost, one of them is Unholy. You will have a 13% magic enhanced bonus again on your Frost Strikes, which can be quite decent. But you could also play this maybe with 2 Frost DKs and go completely freezing the whole team. I think it was called Starling Cleave or something back then. I'm not sure if it's like... I mean, I'm pretty sure it's in a decent tier at least. I think you can get some decent rating with this comp. But yeah, it's not like some S tier comp or something. Then in the can be good tier, it depends on the players a bit. It's going to be hard. You need a lot of coordination with your Rogue probably. But in the end, the Rogue adds needed stun again. And it also adds wound poison if you survive that long. And that's going to be the biggest problem, right? The survivability with this comp. You could probably play with the Holy Pala too. I should have added it there. But in the end, the synergy between Holy Pala and Rogue is not too good. I would advise you to play with the Priest and go more for aggressive pushes, martial spells and purges and stuff like that. Maybe fear of CC. The problem, as I said, is going to be survivability in this comp, but I think you can make it work if you have good players. And then I have also seen this Frost Decay with, again, sub-blood spec. I think it was even more deep blood until Mark of Blood, I'm not too sure. Enhancer, and then another DPS. This can also work out quite well. It's again more for fun, but you can get some okay rating with it, I think. And if you put an Unreal Decay on top, you're just going to be a completely all-in comp. If you would put a Beastmaster as well, and if you would play with Preg, you're probably more of a sustainable comp. But I mean, Unreal Decay, Preg Pal Enhancement is known, it's pretty decent comp. So if you would play Frost Decay again, it's, as I said, it's probably more of a lower tier comp. but it can still work out. These types of triple DPS Frost DK enhanced comps can be decent-ish. And I've seen them actually. I faced them on my, I think, LSD or something, and I got completely just obliterated by this type of comp. They just run on the cloth and put Bloodlust, and then you're gonna be in a lot of trouble. Okay, lastly for this tier, I played a bit of Frost DK Desolok in 3s, and even though we were not with a Pally, it felt already like better than expected. And in theory it makes sense, right? You have the Curse of Elements enhancing the magic damage again. Then you have a Shadow Fury on a very low cooldown. And Shadow Fury is something which helps Frost DK again. Every form of stun helps Frost DK a lot. Then you put Hodge on top of that, it's gonna be decent, I think. And the biggest problem we had, we didn't have Bob, so the lock always died to melees. But if you have a Holy Pala with it, I think this comp can be decent. Maybe it's also maybe one tier below. I wouldn't like be too exact on this tier, by the way. It's just a general idea what you can play in 3-3 and 2v2. But yeah, I would like to play this comp with a good look. It sounds like a lot of fun, and I think it's playable for sure. If you would play it with a priest, you would have the problem again of having no Bob at all. It's a bit more aggressive, but then you would die easily, of course, to melees. What I've played is I've actually played it with a Resto Druid, and I think with the Resto Shaman it would be the same. You're gonna die easier. You don't have a D-spell, only the lock. Ah yeah, that's what I forgot to mention. The lock also has Fell Under D-spell, which is why this comp is actually, I think it can be really good to play lock with this. You will have big burst and you will have a Fell Under D-spell double, offensively as defensively as well. But yeah, the problem we had is you always run these melee cleaves and they will just completely run over you. So it's more of a comp for fun. I think you can still blast and outplay some people, but melee cleave is gonna be your nemesis. And you're not even gonna have a double D-spell, like at least the priest will have a D-spell and PS and stuff like that, and a fear. Okay, this comp is basically the same as the double healer comp, just with the Shadow Priest, and the synergy between Shadow Priest and DK is of course better, like I mentioned earlier, but I think this would still be okay to play, right? If the Shadow Priest watches out and not multi-dot everything, but if you coordinate your burst a bit, you will have the dispersion, you will have the fears potentially with the freeze. I think it's also maybe in the same tier like the lock, not sure. You don't have the extra magic damage, but therefore you'll have some disarm stun on a high cooldown, to be fair. But I think this is playable if the players make it work. And if you would play it with a druid, again, same stuff. It's more susceptible to melee cleaves and probably not in the same tier. And also then here it comes especially into play that you not Unholy, because this comp is actually decent with Unholy, because you have the extra survivability and you can like lame people and but also do good burst on them because of the high magic enhancement of Unholy. So with Frost it will be more of a for fun comp, and you're not going to be as strong as Unholy definitely in this Shadow Cleave type of comp. Same, and it's basically just the same for Resto Shaman like I just mentioned. Then I think Frost DK Frost Mage is also a bit underrated. I haven't played it too much, only very few times, but I think it can kind of work because again you have the deep freeze, and I think everything which has a stun is kind of profitable for Frost DK. And on top of that, I mean the poly and the freeze share the same DR unfortunately, but you have a small mortal effect from the Frost Mage as well as the Shadow Priest, by the way, but they're not gonna matter too much. You will have extra debuff stacking on them. But I think, yeah, that's why I think it's more of a like for fun comp maybe potentially too. But I think with decent players, Frost Mage, Frost DK and a healer, you can definitely make it work somehow and have some okay-ish rating, I would say, with this comp. It's definitely playable. Again, with Holy Pally you're gonna be maybe more tanky. With this priest you will have more synergy between the mage and the priest. But yeah, I think the mage has ice block, so it's a bit more survivable than the lock, which has this is an advantage, right? It doesn't have the extra magic damage, but it has some survivability. And I think this could work with a Holy Pally or with Disc Priest, kind of okay. Then lastly in this tier for the more for fun tier is Prot Pala with the Frost DK. You have insane burst actually with this comp. I've played this on some private server, we were farming everything, but there was no competition, so it doesn't really count. If you add a Disc Priest on it, it's probably the best to go with a Disc Priest. You could also be playing the Holy Pala. By the way, also with red you could play double Pala Frost DK. I think you have enough damage to play this, but then you're probably too defensive, to be honest. Disc Priest should be the best choice again. Could be pretty solid with the Resto Shaman as well. Resto Druid, not too sure. No offensive purge. It might be needed for this comp, honestly. So I would say Disc Priest and Resto Shaman is a bit more of your typical choice here. Anyway, the biggest problem in this comp is that the Prot Pala is like automatically cleaving. He's throwing his Avenger Shield, and also his dot spreads automatically from his seal if he wants to be big damage. So I think this is the biggest downside with this comp. It's gonna be an insane fun burst in the Hodge, but the propeller might break some crucial CC or like even dotting up targets without wanting dot up targets. So I don't think this is like a super decent comp. It's just more for fun blaster comp as well. Then lastly, I want to mention these two comps, Druid either with a Feral or a Boomkin with a healer. And this is one of the comps I haven't actually played. I just think it sounds kind of okay on paper, because the Boomkin again has the magic damage enhancement for the Frost Decay, the 13% magic damage, same as Lock and Addon Decay. And you can freeze people up, and then you can starve for them pretty much. Like, you can get good setups with the comp, I think. And Frost Decay and Boomkin could be nutty burst together. This was like in Shadowlands, I mean, it's different expansion, but in Shadowlands, Frost Decay Boomkin was kind of S tier comp for some time, I think. In Classic, it would be more of a meme type comp, but I think it could be still in the decent tier actually if you make it work somehow. And Feral is basically the same. You're gonna stun people as a Feral again. You have Bash with it, and it's probably working out quite okay if you give the Feral the haste buff from Frost Decay. Frost Decay also gets a crit buff, the melee crit buff from Feral. As I said, I have never played it, but I think you could still gain some decent rating, and if you have friends who are playing Druid DPS, I think it's playable for sure. That's why I put it in this surprise comp tier, which could be decent. And that's it about most of the comps I would consider playable for 2v2 or 3v3. I cannot go more into detail about the matchups or specific stuff like this, of course, because this guide is already long as hell. But maybe in the future, if there's demand, I will make a specific matchup guide for some comps. Okay, so it's time to take a look at the talents. The spec itself, which is the crucial foundation of everything, right? So there is a lot of different points which we would like to take, but unfortunately we can't afford to have them all. So in the end, we need to make trade-offs. And this is where it comes down to personal preference a lot. For example, Howling Blast, some people don't like Howling Blast and invested in another point. But I personally think for just one talent point, it offers a great deal of value. It's an extra spell you can use in a lot of ways, and I would always personally take Holy Blast. Other than that, you can move around a lot of the talent points and still have a good, decent spec to play with. So take everything I say with a bit grain of salt. It's about my preference, and I'm just going to show you the main variations of what people are running and how you can juggle around all these points. There's so many good talents in Frost. Let's say, for example, just take 2% less frost damage, and this talent, for example, gives you a 1% chance that melee hits will be missed. So we have basically a passive night elf miss chance. Can be really good. It's like, I mean, there's so many good talents. You could also, for example, just Rune Tap would be also viable to spec like this. I think this is not really bad to have especially if you have no healer, but normally you have a healer in arena, but 10% healing on a 1 minute cooldown for 1 blood rune. Not bad actually. There's so many good talents which you could use and make a useful spec for yourself. So I'm not a big fan of giving you one spec which you should use. These talents are also so juicy that you should try look for yourself what do you prefer to run. But yeah, it can be always helpful to play around with new talents, and maybe you find something new which can help you also in arena. All the specs I'm gonna show you are more for arena than for battleground, because in battleground it's pretty much you can play anything, right? I would also not advise you to play Frost in battlegrounds, because it's just not fun if you freeze half the team, they all drink it. I'm just running unholy in battlegrounds because I have also more damage from range and don't need to go into melee range that much, which is not fun without pocket heals. If you have pocket heals, you can play whatever you want, to be honest. One last talent I want to mention is Acclamation. This is still a decent talent. I think it was a better talent on private servers. On some private server it even gave you holy resistance, which could be quite a nutty. You actually took less damage from paladins even, and they had no way to counter this because they would never use spellpin, of course. It works in a weird way in Classic that some spell schools give you an extra buff which is also dispellable. That means it also acts as a dispel protection for yourself, for like Purging Kings or your Sacred Shield if you play, or Priest Shields, whatever. But other spell codes, weirdly enough, don't give you this dispel protection. You get the buff to have magic resistance, but you don't get the extra buff counting as a purge puffer. So it's actually weird, and that's the reason why I decided to not use Acclimation, because it's basically nerfed in Classic for whatever reason. At least the dispel aspect of it. And it can be still useful at times. I was using it actually one time against the Mutilate Rogue, and I'm pretty sure I would have died against the Mutilate Rogue if I didn't have the 120 perma nature resistance from him tunneling me with his deadly poisons. But as I said, Frost Spec has a lot of points to choose from, and you already have a scarcity of points, so I didn't use Acclimation overall in Classic and rather go for damage. This is the spec I'm running, and I'm just gonna briefly explain the main talents. Increased Runic Power cap, of course, is a must-have, same as go down here for have improved Ice Talents, gives you passively 20% melee haste, stacks up with this as well, so we have a lot of haste. Lichborn, of course, same as Anoli. Annihilation is a special case, for me it's mandatory, but there's a different spec which I'm gonna show you running without Annihilation, and you're never gonna obliterate in that spec. In my spec you're gonna obliterate sometimes. Nerfs of course, Steel is a must-have because you're dual wielding and it gives you more offhand weapon damage and hit. This makes you actually need less hit than Anoli, by the way, if you want hit cap, because you get 3% for free here. Endless Winter is a must-have, so you have free kick without costing Runic Power. Chill of the Grave as well gives you more Runic Power on your chains and Howling Blast. Killing Machine is crucial, it makes your Frost Strikes crit as a proc as well as Howling Blast. Why don't I run 5 out of 5? I think most DKs only run 4 out of 5 in PvP, because it will give you enough procs that you can effectively use. Because you also sometimes need to save up your procs for a good situation to burst, and if you have 5 out, I mean of course 5 out of 5 would be decent, but you will have a scarcity of points already in Frost Spec, so 4 out of 5 is a good sweet spot to have enough procs, but not have wasted procs where you would like get another one and you didn't even get to use yours. So this is the sweet spot for me. Glacier Rod, obviously same as PvE, and all these talents. I don't think I have to go all over them detail, right? It's just what makes Frost do a lot of damage, that you have more damage when your target has diseases, and also an execute ability that you do 12% more damage on all your abilities basically when target is low health. Death Chill is something you would take in PvP in my opinion. I think you don't take this in PvP, no you don't. And in PvP I would take this because it's basically a on-demand burst cooldown. Gives you on use to have a big crit for either Obliterate or Frost Strike or Howling Blast. Most of the time it's gonna be Frost Strike probably. And just added on extra bursts on demand, which is really important for PvP. Then Rhyme is something I personally don't take. I tried it on the beta and on some private servers, but it's okay. It's not a bad talent. It's not completely wasted if you spec into it. But 5% is a really low chance to have a proc for this, and also 5% obliterate chance is kind of meh. If you put 2 points on it, you have 10% chance, but then again, where do you get 2 points, right? You lose 4% frost damage if you would do this, and I think you're not obliterating that often in PvP for it to be worth, in my opinion, to take this talent. But it's also a talent, if you want obliterate crits and somehow are a fan of it, sure, it's not a completely wasted talent. That's one halfway flexible talent, I would say. Harmony Cold is a must-have. It's basically one of your best talents. Chillblains is a talent which used to be optional for me, but I think at this point in Classic it's pretty much mandatory. I'm gonna explain in depth later why I think it's needed to have Chillblains. Not as a optional utility, but as a crucial talent to slow your enemies. Unbreakable Armor, of course, must have. It's one of the biggest cooldowns. Increases your strength as well as your armor by a lot. Good burst cooldown. Blood of the North is also mandatory. It increases your Frost Strike damage and Blood Strike damage flat out by 10%. That's alone should be enough reason to have it. But it also has another really nice feature which can turn your Blood Runes into Death Runes whenever you use them with Blood Strike or Pestilence. That is of course a nice bonus feature to have. You're gonna be losing Death Runes a lot more on Frost Spec than on Anoli Spec. And State of the Sarena is what makes you be able to dual wield as Frost DK, and it's essential, same as nerfs is Cold Steel basically. It hurts us a lot to have to invest 6 talent points for dual wielding, but in the end it's worth, and dual wielding is more damage overall, and not only damage, it's also more utility to have 2 weapon enchants, for example. Also your offhand never misses. It's similar to Rogue Shift, so when you dodge or parry or miss or whatever, your offense is still gonna hit all the time with this. This talent is really crucial and what makes Frost DK a good dual wielding class. Frost Strike is one of your main abilities, of course it's mandatory. This is another crucial talent, it just makes your crits do a lot, so just same as in PvE, it's essential for your damage. Same as Tundra Stalker. Another thing to note about Tundra Stalker is maybe that it's similar to this talent, right, for Unholy, except that it's more, and it's also your Frost Fever, not your Blood Plague, so it's your main priority to keep up is always Frost Fever for Frost DK. Maybe that I'm gonna talk about rotation later, but yeah, it's also essential and increases your damage when you have disease on your target, and especially Frost Fever. Howling Blast.
Howling Blast! Howling Blast! Howling Blast! Thank you!
Basically your best range ability if you use it. Comes in really handy in a lot of situations. I think it's mandatory personally. If you're not using it, you can still play Frost DK. It's not that a lot of Frost DKs back then didn't even use this. But I think it's a really nice, for just one talent point at this point, to have a ability which can be useful in a lot of situations. I think it's definitely worth. And now Violence is essential because you will have problems with people dispelling your diseases, but Violence makes it so it's not as easy for people to get your disease off. So and it also double dips with Chillblains in the sense that your slow is harder to remove. It's really essential. Really good talent. Without this talent, Frost would be unplayable, I think, without Violence. Then briefly, the Blood Tree. These points are pretty much flex points, almost all of them. They're just useful, but you can also just go, let's say, Subversion instead of Blade Barrier. You can exchange them. And this will make your Obliterate crit more often for 9%, is kind of decent. But when you use this, you will have 3% less damage most of the time. And it's just a question, do you want to play? You can also ditch this talent here, Butchery. It's useful to have more Runic Power sometimes, but it's not that much. And you can also go like this, 5% Blade Barrier. I like to have the Runic Power actually, because Runic Power is, you never know when you need Runic Power. So if I go Blade Barrier, I would put 3 points probably in it, but you can go 5. It's just, as I said, it's flex points. And the question is, do you want to be more defensive or more offensive? So if you want more damage, go this. If you want more damage reduction, go Blade Barrier. And Bladed Armor is really nice. It increases your attack power by a lot. 1 talent point in Bladed Armor is roughly 80 attack power right now. I think it's 83 if you have full BiS Gear. So basically you can think 1 talent point is 2 full strength gems. And if you would spec 5 points in it, you would have like 200 strength, which is really juicy. As for Bladed Armor versus Black Ice, these are pretty much similar in value, I think. You could also do something like this and just go 5 points in Black Ice, 2 points Bladed Armor. It's not, I think you won't really notice a difference between them. It's just a question, do you want your Frost Strike or Howling Blast do a bit more? Or just do you want a bit more overall damage where your Obliterate and auto attacks and stuff also hit a bit harder? And I like to balance them out actually. I like it like this, 4 and 3. It's a good balance between them. But in the end, it's sad that you don't have enough points to max them out. I mean, you would have if you would remove Icy Reach, and then which a lot of people do actually, you can play like this and then almost max out both talents points. As for Icy Reach, I think it's not mandatory to have this. Sometimes I run also like this, 1 point Icy Reach, just to have a bit more range. But it's just, I absolutely hate to get kited, and if you have only 1 or 0 points in it, you will find yourself be out of range for Howling Blast and Chains of Ice a lot of times, and all the damage in the world doesn't help you if you get outranged, kited, outplayed. And you also can destroy totems easier, you can remove Grounding Totem from max range, same range as your grip basically. I just prefer to have Ice Reach. It's a really useful talent. I'm willing to trade it off for having a bit less damage, but you can play without Ice Reach if you don't think it's worth, and you're probably gonna win some games based on damage, but you lose other games based on getting outranged. Okay, last talent I want to mention is Scent of Blood. It's actually a kind of juicy talent. It gives you a chance to have a proc which stacks up, and then your next melee swing is gonna generate Runic Power, or basically it's like refunding Runic Power even. And that will make you have more Runic Power in the end. People used to run actually 2 points out of 3 in this on AT, and I think people thought that dual wielding is more worth having 2 points, but I don't think so. Of course, it would be nice to have 2 out of 3 into this. You can do that if you absolutely want to, but I found that it procs so often you're playing so often as DK and also dodging or whatever, and it stacks up to a high number even with 1 point out of 3. So I would rather, and you're gonna have more Runic Power than you can use already. If you're correctly pulling your Runic Power and waiting for a good opportunity to damage, you will not able to use all your Runic Power in one burst window. So I would rather take flat out damage instead of Scent of Blood, or of course Howling Blast. So I think 1 of the 3 points is enough. If you want 2 out of 3, you can do that. It's up to you. It's a really good talent to have, and it's also really nice that you have a lot of procs by just using one out of 3 in this. Okay, I hope that was every important talent. Yeah, my spec looks like this. This is what I'm usually running now. And the standard spec back on AT, what most Frost DKs were using, was looking like this. It's not too far off, except Icy Reach was not favored, as well as Howling Blast. And it's definitely fine to have a Frost DK spec which is like this. The main difference here is unholy command, which I can understand. It's really nice to have unholy command. The main problem I have with it is that you have to invest 4 points just to get there. So we get 10 second grip reduction for 4 talent points, and 4 talent points equals more than 300 attack power. Then again, grip is a really nice and important cooldown. So for myself, I came up with the conclusion to run this spec. I would personally still use Icy Reach because I fucking hate not having Icy Reach. That's just my personal preference, but it is what it is. And same for Howling Blast. So this is a spec I would run when I'm playing with Disc Priest. I would make more use out of grips because of grip fear combo. Not only grip hungry cold, but also grip fear at the same time. Also, Priest is more vulnerable than Holy Pala, so the grip is needed to peel more. So I feel like this is the go-to spec for Disc Priest, and the other spec is more for Holy Pala when you just try to do raw damage and not grip that often. At least not for grip fear. That's just how I view it. You're free to. You also definitely fine playing this spec with Holy Pala if you want to. I think at one point I didn't even bother respecking and played this spec with Holy Pala as well. It was nice to have more grip hodge, more grip freeze combinations on lower cooldown. It's as I said, it's person preference, and both these specs are completely fine. If you ditch Icy Reach, you're probably still fine. And that are the main variations of the go-to Frost spec. But there is more to it. Let's go to another spec. Here we have the spec which is not using Obliterate at all. This is why you ditch Annihilation. And you have more talent points free from this. Well, not completely free, because this talent gives you also more crit chance on your styles, so it's not completely useless to have this, even if you want to ditch Obliterate. But I mean, of course it's better to have these talent points if you're not using Obliterate. More frost damage or more flat out attack power. The main difference is, if you don't Obliterate, you will have to find another ability which uses your Unholy and Frost runes, and that will have to be, in most cases, Howling Blast. I will talk about it later, the difference between these two specs, but as you see, Howling Blast also has a cooldown. So you will have to use Death Strike or single runes with 2 globals instead of Obliterate, which can be kinda bad at times. We lose out on a kind of useful ability at times. You're not obliterating that often in PvP, but I think it's still nice to have it in the back pocket. And as you also get crit in this talent, I think it's nice to have the option to be able to obliterate. One of the main reasons why I think this spec was so popular back then on AT is that 80% of matchups you would face would be War Palas in the end of Season 8, because nobody would play something else almost. And of course, a spec like this, you can see that it's more useful to have just raw damage on your Frost Strikes in this spec, and you're not obliterating that often against plates. So this spec is kind of more viable in a purely based Warpal meta. It's still not what I like, it's not my style to play without Obliterate, but I will show you more about that later. It's definitely a playable spec, and you're not trolling if you play like this. You just have to be aware that if you ever Obliterate in this spec, your diseases are completely gone. So it's a different playstyle from the usual other spec, which looks like this. Just a quick note, the ability to be able to remove your diseases with Obliterate comes in handy in this spec, actually. This is the main reason why I would maybe use this spec as an alternative spec. If I would play with a Hunter, for example, in 3s, it can be actually useful to be Obliterating and removing your diseases off your target, to be able to see them again. So I hope people are not using this spec to be able to take Obliterate off your bars and have less buttons to press, because you should not be doing that. It's always nice to have more buttons to press, right, if they can bring in good value. Same with Howling Blast and Obliterate, also against low armor types. Alright, Jesus, has been almost 20 minutes talking all about specs. Okay, let me finish this up real fast. The Glyphs is a bit easier. They are almost gonna remain the same all the time. Minor Glyphs is the same, exactly the same as Unholy. Blood Tap, you probably want to exchange Blood Tap with Raise Dead if you don't want to buy Corpse Dust all the time. Technically it's more value to have Blood Tap. I use, at the end of season, if I'm retrying, I use Blood Tap and buy like 300 stacks of Raise Dead. But normally you should just use Raise Dead here, to be honest. These 3 Glyphs, same as Unholy. And the Magic Shell is actually one of the strongest Glyphs, so it should be mandatory most of the time. And then Frost Strike, so pretty self-explanatory, same as in PvE. Reduce your Runic Power cost for Frost Strike. And then Hungry Cold, so your Hungry Cold doesn't eat up 40 Runic Power. So that would be kind of 8s actually, if you would have to use 40 Runic Power to freeze someone. So these are your Glyphs, and they pretty much the best Glyphs of all. The only Glyph I would personally maybe change is Anti-Magic Shell. If you're like, let's say the example again, you're facing only Warpals and nobody's playing casters, then you could swap this Glyph, although there's not too many dope Glyphs to swap to be honest. One of the most useful Glyphs is, I don't think Obliterate is that good to use Glyph of Obliterate against, especially if you face these sad Warpals. Probably the best Glyphs against them would be Strangle Glyph. Could be actually juicy in a Warpal meter, because you desync the Strangulate cooldown with Big Sack and also Divine Sack, and also their Season 8 Barbel is gonna be a problem, and then you're gonna have Strangulate without them having to be able to barbel all the time on your Strangulate. So that's the best anti-Warpal Glyph, or anti-non-caster Glyph, I would say, pretty sure. Obliterate Glyph, again, is decent if you're like facing close only, but overall not the best Glyph, because Obliterate is more of a filler and not your main damage spell in PvP. And yeah, the other Glyphs are not as good. So, but yeah, overall, definitely Anti-Magic Shell is the best Glyph of all. Imagine facing Priest Mage and not having Anti-Magic Shell. Oh my god. So yeah, that's it for Glyphs. Pretty straightforward compared to the specs. Before we finally get into rotation and re-gameplay, I promise, there's just one more spec I want to briefly show you, because I know there's people interested in it. I was running it on the beta, I had some videos on it, the two-hand Frost Spec, which is like more of a fun spec and not a serious spec at this point, I'm pretty sure of that. And it's utilizing a two-hand weapon, so you can also take these talent points, makes you deal more damage with a two-hand. You can drop all these doable points, freeing up 6 talent points, which is quite a lot. But overall you need to consider that you also lose another weapon enchant, which loses out on flat 10% damage if you take Razor Eyes, or Fallen Crusader is also really big. So you need to consider that. You need to consider a few other things, like not having Threat of Tessarian is actually sometimes less consistent. Dual Wield is overall more DPS anyway, even though your auto attacks miss more often. But also Threat of Tessarian gives you basically a guaranteed offhand hit whenever you miss, dodge or parry, which can be more consistent damage in most situations. So in short, you mostly want to do it. And overall, do wield has a lot of useful stuff. You can kill totems faster, you can your hits get updated more often, so to say. You can break shields faster with it. And your procs with Killing Machine should still be the same. It's PPM based, so that shouldn't be the difference there, but you need to, in my opinion, the spec is more like, when I played it, it's more spiky damage, because you don't get the hits that often, so it is more of a gamble if your longer melee swing will hit. And in general, yeah, for example, if you miss with a 2-hander, then you're gonna get the full miss and not Threat of the Sarena, at least the offhand damage. If you hit in rogue and evasion, or if you just completely dodge. If you hit all your strikes, it's a good damage. It also looks more fun because its number is higher on screen. And so I would compare it to something like maybe 2-hand Enhance. It's more of a montage spec for BG, high crits, fun chunky damage type of spec. And it's not that bad, and honestly, it's not that far off from doable as people think. If you would have like really strong 2-hand weapon from TOC, let's say, and a deadly weapon or blue weapon, I would definitely play a 2-hand spec. It's not, the difference is not this big as people think. It's just not the spec I would recommend if you're really trying to push high level arena PvP. It also gives you the option to maybe jug around a few more points. Let's say, because you have more talent points free with this, right? You could do something like this and suddenly have acclamation available if you want. I did this sometimes when I was trying the spec out. That's actually how I even discovered that acclamation is still sometimes useful, but as I mentioned earlier, compared to private servers, it's not as good. You can also go for Rhyme, for example, and then suddenly have this 10% obliterate crit, and it looks kind of fun if you get a high obliterate crit followed up by a Killing Machine Frost Strike. But yeah, I feel like in the end it was more fun on the beta when you would suddenly eat half of the HP from someone in 2 hits if you got lucky and nothing miss or dodge at all. And people are also running less resilience in Season 5 and on the beta, obviously. And I think it's kind of sucks if you have to wait for a long 2-hand swing now to update to get the Killing Machine procs these days. So yeah, as I said, it's still probably fun in BG to have high crit montage. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Okay, as for the actual rotation, it's pretty much not as fixed rotation in PvP as in PvE, because there's a lot of things you need to watch, right? You need to be aware of slowing the enemy with chains, you need to maybe use your MS, you need other globals like Hungering Cold in between, so that I cannot really explain overall right now. It's more dependent on the situation, and I advise you to watch the videos where I actually play the game in Arena to get a gist of how to prioritize these. But it's important to note that in general there is a priority. For example, before I start, you should always keep your buff up, of course, get a Weakauras. I'm going to show that later, that reminds you if your horn is running out before you go into the fight. For example, if I would start now, I would get reminded that I have no buffs. And then if you start with 0 Runic Power in a fight, you should always, it's pretty useless to start bursting right now. For example, if I would start bursting right now without Runic Power, like this, get your disease up, obliterate, Frost Strike, then the target is not going to die and I'm going to be out of Runic Power. So you need to make sure, if you're bursting in PvP, to follow up your damage. So it's ideal to go in a fight when you have high Runic Power ready. So that's why I mostly, when I'm not bursting, farming Runic Power with chains, Plague Strike, and then ideally, if you have time, in other chains and Plague Strike, because it gives you more Runic Power than using Obliterate already. If you would Obliterate already, you would maybe have a bit more burst right now, but it's like ineffective use of globals for farming Runic Power. Your go-to presence is going to be Unreal Presence most of the time, similar to Unreal DK and every other spec. It's low global colon is just too valuable in PvP. For example, especially if as I said earlier, if you have to refresh your diseases fast, you will have a shorter global colon than the enemy healer dispelling, and it's kind of crucial for a lot of situations to have a low global colon. I don't think there's any other better presence overall. You can of course go to Frostblins, and you should go to Frostblins if you're about to die or get tunneled a lot by a physical DPS, and you can swap back later. Blood Presence has a really rare use cases in some situations. For example, if you were to finish someone and you are sure that you're gonna kill him or have a good shot at killing him in a when he's low HP. What you could do is, because Blood Presence swapping has no global clone, you could swap Blood Presence and hit him at the same time with Killing Machine, for example, Death Chill. That's the only case where I like sometimes use Blood Presence in Arena. Other than that, maybe in a 1v1 against the healer it can be useful because it's more of a long PvE rotation based game. There I find myself using Blood Presence rarely, but 99% of the time you're gonna use either Frost or Honor Presence, and Frost Presence also only if you're defensive. It's kind of good to go Frost Presence sometimes. It's more rewarding compared to Honey because you get armor from it, and armor gives you attack power. But as I said, the most important presence is Honor Presence for the faster global cooldown. Sadly, you don't have faster rune regeneration like Unholy, but it's still the most valuable presence for PvP by far. As I said, pulling your Runic Power can be quite important, especially if you play with a healer. It can be important to time your burst in synchronization with the Hodge of your Holy Pala. Depends on your situation if you need to pull your Runic Power or not. Just be careful that you're not suddenly out of Runic Power or runes and cannot finish your target off. Then after you use your Frost and Unholy runes, the last priority is of course your Blood runes, which you're going to spend just as a filler basically. Except of course if you want to spread your diseases with Pestilence for a slow or finding rogues. But other than that, your Blood Strike and your Pestilence acts more of a filler. I like to use Pestilence sometimes because it cannot be dodged or parried, opposed to Blood Strike. But they're both not going to do a significant damage, so Blood Strike if you want to do a bit more damage, especially to clothes, while farming the Runic Power, and Pestilence for other use cases. And of course, if you need to find a rogue or if you want to spread your disease in the moment, it can be your first priority depending on the situation. Same goes for Strangulate, one of the most important cooldowns, which is using a Blood Runes, and that's again nothing you can put really in a fixed priority rotation because it just depends. If you think you can get a kill with it, you use your Strangulate of course. Just be careful to not spend all of your Blood Runes if you think you're gonna need Strangulate in the next moment. So sometimes you need to think a bit ahead and decide if you want to prepare or / pull damage, or if you want to go actually for the kill and start bursting. But if you actually start bursting, I'm going to show you now what to do. And the first point is it depends actually a bit on the armor type of the enemy, what spells you're using. But whatever armor type your enemy has, if you want to start bursting, you would, after your disease up of course, that's always your first priority. And if your disease get dispelled, you're just doing what I said earlier, you just chains, Plague Strike again. So that's why it's also not that big of a deal if your disease actually get removed. You're gonna chains and Plague Strike most of the time just to build Runic Power. Now the first priority actually to burst in PvP is if you have a Killing Machine proc. Let me get one real quick. You should get a Weakauras by the way, it tracks your Killing Machine procs, it's really important. And if you're really about to do damage, there it is. Your highest priority is to get this Killing Machine off. Ideally press your buttons like Unbreakable Armor or Racials also, like this, and then you Killing Machine. Then my disease ran out, but because I was not paying attention. Yeah, of course, disease has you up, and then you press your Killing Machine Frost Strike. And this is gonna do a lot of HP actually from the enemy. And if you don't get procs, you could also, if they're gonna proc, instantly use it. This is when you want to go full on kill mode, right? You farm for Killing Machine. If you don't have it, you just can press Death Shield. Now I got it, of course, but and then you have 2 in a row because that's a good thing. In Classic, they don't get consumed. So there it is, and you instantly spend it. But now you're out of fire, right? Now you used all your Runic Power, and you would have to go back to farming Runic Power again. And you would have to do this, Plague Strike chains. If you're like in semi-burst mode and you have your target is low HP, you can also Obliterate again. That's why I like Obliterate. It's not the best damage in PvP, but it's a good filler, even against plates sometimes. It depends on the situation. Just make sure your diseases are always up, so if somebody would dispel your Frostfeaver, you would have to react and reapply Frostfeaver before pressing Killing Machine. Unless your target is like 10% HP, then you can also try to Obliterate or Frost Strike without disease. But that's pretty much the exception, where you don't have your disease on the target. You should always try keeping Frostfeaver up, and if you use one Frost Rune, you might as well use the Unholy Rune, right? Because you cannot really, you have to use both runes together to get something out of it. You cannot really Obliterate with one Frost Rune only, so you probably might pretty much think them. And why it's good to have Blood Plague as well is it's a second protection for your Frostfeaver. If your Blood Plague gets dispelled, it's not a big deal, but if your Frostfeaver gets dispelled, you're gonna do no damage because of these talents. So that's basically some stuff to keep track of. And as I said, killing machine Frost Strike is a big deal alone. And you don't have to worry more about that much else, because your Razor Eyes of course should be on the target, but you're gonna have that, if you have uptime, it's gonna be automatically on the target. And yeah, if you want to burst, now I would press Obliterate until I have killing machine procs. Now I have to use Frost Strike without a proc. Now I use another one because of a proc. Now I need to get my Ds up because I have another proc. And this is how you would pretty much burst. Another one, you instantly follow up on these killing machine procs. Now, you see what I did there? I didn't have Runic Power, so I used Howling Blast killing machine proc, because I want to finish off the target, right? So there's so much variables in PvP. And if this would be 2 plate variables now, you can also start sparing your diseases with Pestilence and then just Howling Blast them to cleave them. That's another important thing. And you're basically just waiting for your killing machine procs, and you have to time them in a way that it really executes your enemy or gives high pressure to them. If your target is cloth, use more Obliterate in general. If it's leather, probably also worth more. But if the target has high armor, you're probably gonna keep doing chains, Plague Strike, and then your Frost Strike and Howling Blast also is what's gonna hit them harder. So you need to adjust your rotation also on the fly, based on what armor type you're facing. As for the rest of the runes, I didn't even mention Blood Strike, I think. So if you done farming Runic Power and obliterating, Frost Striking, now you have only Blood runes left. You can Blood Strike as a filler, or you can also Blood Boil if you want to get someone out of stealth, or if you... actually, you rarely Blood Boil as BiS. Getting someone out of stealth would be the only exception, unless you are not in melee range, and you can Blood Boil as well. It's a filler point. And yeah, these are the use cases of Blood Runes, Pestilence or Blood Strike. And the important thing here is, if you used your Blood Strike or Pestilence, you want to get Death Runes. That's a feature which WotLK mostly doesn't have, unless you spec Reaping, but nobody does this right now in PvP. But FrostDK gets this for free from this talent, Blood of the North. And you need to be careful. If you would spend all your Frost runes now, Death runes now, for example like this, let's say I would just double Obliterate right now, and then I want to kill someone, then I don't have a Blood Rune for Strangulate. That's an important note, so you need to be tracking your runes even more as FrostDK, I think. Other than that, it's nice to be able to have Blood Runes, because, of course, after like Blood Striking or Pestilencing, you can use one more chains, right? Or Icy Touch, Howling Blast even maybe, depending on the situation. So Death Runes is in principle a nice feature. You just need to be watch out a bit for them as FrostDK. Because your most important Blood Rune is probably going to be Strangulate, and that's pretty much the only thing you have to save your Blood Rune for. Blood Strike is not really important, as I said, it's a filler talent. You can try fish for Crusader procs with it, as it procs also on your strikes, not only your auto attacks. But your most important runes are the Frost runes and Under runes to get either the disease up or obliterates with those low armor types, Howling Blast against high armor types. And yeah, this way you generate Runic Power, and you spend your Runic Power on Frost Strikes mostly. If you are on range and want to finish someone or pressure them, you can also coil them from range in PvP. And then you could Howling Blast and coil another time. I often do this actually if I'm close to Runic Power cap, then I'm sometimes using coil. Let's say I have like Runic Power now, and if I want to get rid of a Runic Power and do damage while running them, I can coil them one time and then follow up with your melees. But that's situational again, so just don't take coil off your bars only because they're playing Frost. It's sometimes useful to be able to death coil. You can also kill totems with it. Okay, another important thing is, if you have high Runic Power bar and you're about to cap out like here, it's also bad to do another chains or obliterate right now, or like what I did to Plague Strike again. You should not really overcap Runic Power too much. You should spend probably one Frost Strike to be at a good amount of Runic Power all the time. Don't overcap Runic Power, it's kind of wasted if you do this. Same with Horn of Winter and Blood Tap. You can use these to gain fast. Let's say I have no Runic Power now, I need... let me dump my Runic Power real quick. Say I have no Runic Power, I need AMS, I can Blood Tap to get AMS or IBF off. Same thing for IBF, I can press any buttons, Horn of Winter for example, to get Runic Power. So it's important to keep track of Runic Power. It's pretty much in PvP, it's a more important resource than in PvE. If you're about to burst from start and it's double DPS team and you're facing, let's say, a Rogue and Hodge, sure, you can start like this, chains, Plague Strike and then obliterate. And you can even ERW, another obliterate, and he's gonna eat a shit ton of damage. But if there's a healer and he's out-healing all the burst, then it's not the way to play. So you need to adjust your playstyle based on what you're facing. And I cannot... as I said, it depends on the situation a lot, how you're gonna deal damage. I can just give you a general idea. Of course, if you would run the spec which I mentioned earlier without annihilation, then you cannot obliterate. If you would obliterate now on a cloth, your disease would be gone, so you don't really do this, and you're always gonna use Howling Blast instead. And if Howling Blast is on cooldown, like now, you would have to use Death Strike instead, but look at the damage, it's pretty pathetic. So that's just a different playstyle. You would probably end up doing Chains, Plague Strike most of the time, and then follow up by Frost Strikes and Howling Blasts instead. And then if you're Howling Blast on CD, you just have to use 2 globals most of the time to build up your disease, and then I don't know if you even Death Strike for burst. I don't really recommend it. I'm not an expert in the non-obliterate spec, but yeah, just keep in mind that you of course don't obliterate unless you want your disease to be gone. That would be the only exception where you obliterate actually in the spec. And yeah, that's pretty much main rotations, but keep in mind it's not a real rotation, it's more of a priority system. And I can only recommend you to start playing and get a feel for it. After some time you will get a feel for it, what spells are the best in which situation. The core foundation of the spec is always the Killing Machine Frost Strikes, which will deal a lot of damage to plate wearers as well as cloth wearers in PvP. And I want you to understand how it works. And it's only proccing from your auto attacks. I'm going to show you right here. It will only proc based on your main hand auto attacks from nothing else. You'll be able to see whenever I press any strike or anything else, it never affects the proc. Proc only comes from the main hand auto attack and also not from the offhand auto attack. That's why I enabled this add-on also. It's kind of useful to visualize this. I'm gonna tell you a little more about that later in the add-on section. It's not that important, honestly. Some people ask me, oh, do you have to have this add-on? You don't really have to watch it all the time because your attack speed is so fast anyway, and you should definitely not hold a global to wait for your main hand swing to maybe get a Killing Machine proc. Maybe actually in 1 out of 100 games you could do it, but most of the time you're gonna spend your global anywhere else anyway. And it's just nice to visualize the procs with this add-on right now. Big damage buttons that you should press when you're bursting is of course Unbreakable Armor and your Racials and Death Chill. You should try to macro them together. I'm going to show you the macros later. So that when you're bursting, you're always pressing these buttons together. And Icy Touch. So if you want to Icy Touch, then you need to be careful that you don't have a Killing Machine proc, otherwise you pretty much wasted the proc. And as for Icy Touch, this is where we get into more of general tips and tricks and not a set rotation. You can slow your target by chaining the target, or you can slow your target by Icy Touching target, right? But the problem with Classic is, at least on private server it was like this, that these 2 buffs, Chains and Chillblains, would stack together and you would have basically 2 slows on the target, and if they were dispelled, 1 stays, so it's a good protection. In Classic, unfortunately, it doesn't work. As you see, you run the Chillblains and it overrides with Chain of Ice. So this is kind of scuffed, and one of the main reasons, by the way, why Frost Decay is not as strong against Warpal specifically as it was on private servers. And you have to be able to decide when you want to chain someone and when you want to Icy Touch someone. If people are spam dispelling your chains, it can be useful to slow them with Icy Touch again instead, to be able to get the Chillblains, because it has a chance to resist the dispel. And if somebody is simply holding down this dispel button, it will have a lot of use to slow them down with Icy Touch. Other than that, you're not pressing Icy Touch that much. You should press, if you want to do damage with the Frost, you should on range you should press Howling Blast instead. And if you want to get disease up, you probably change them. Another thing that's maybe worth noting is whenever you freeze people or enemies, they will always have Chillblains and Frost Fever on them. That can be useful, so you don't have to press another chains. But can also be a downside. If there's POM on the target, they all gonna have dots, and you automatically will get the dots on them. So you need to be careful before freezing that people don't have Prayer of Mending, otherwise they will heal like crazy from the dot bounce. If you have low Runic Power, and let's say you would freeze someone and wait for a heal to come hot, what you can do is you can press a few chains, like here, or even blood tap another one, and see you almost have free Runic Power bar by just waiting for your healer to hodge, and you can build up Runic Power this way in Hungry and Cold. This is also why you don't take Shades of Ice Glyphs, of course, because it would break the Hungry and Cold. But if you're just changing without doing any damage, you're not going to break the freeze and can prepare damage this way. It depends on the situation a lot if you would instantly start bursting or if you just wait a few globals and press chains to get Runic Power. Then another thing which is kind of useful if you have boss or one disease on target, you can spread them with Pestilence to get the Chillblains slow as well. So there you see the utility of Chillblains in general. I would not advise you to play without it at this point. I tried it because I thought it's also useless if chains overrides Chillblains, but in the end it gives you just so much utility to be able to AoE slow your target and to also to also have a kind of resistance against spam dispel, right? If people spam dispelling your chains, they're always going to get the chains off, and you will never be able to catch up to someone. Yeah, I think I've mentioned most abilities by now. Of course, Death Grip is similar to Non-Obliterate. I'm not going to go over every single spell because that's just going to take too much time. As for Frost specifically, there's not really much of a difference in how you use Empower Rune Weapon. Like, it's pretty much same use case as Unreal, it depends on the situation. Sometimes it's even worth to, let's say I have no Runic Power now, sometimes it's even worth to just use your ERW. Let's say someone would about to stun me, I can just use ERW just to get IBF, for example. Probably not gonna happen that often, but that shows you how important Empower Runic Weapon is depending on the situation. Other than that, ideally you want to use it to gain Runic Power and reset your runes, of course, and to finish up your burst. But I also find great value sometimes in being able to empower Runic Weapon and chain someone if he would get away from me, and you can press your chains to be able to chain them basically 6 times in a row if you have death runes, for example. But it's important to keep in mind that it's a big impact cooldown, so if you want to use it for just to get AMS up or IBF or to chain someone, then it needs to have a big impact at the moment. You can compare it to something like Prep or Cold Snap from Mage or Rogue. And yeah, it really depends on the situation. You can also use it just to do damage, but then you should only, like similar to PvE, if you would have like all your runes spent now, and if this was like, let's say Cloth, I can ERW Obliterate. If this was a plate, I could have also Howling Blast here, and of course you weave in your Frost Strikes if you get Cam procs. It just needs to be worth, because it's a 5-minute cooldown. I try to hold ERW as long as possible until I see a basically game-winning opportunity, or at least a big impact opportunity, because it's such a long cooldown and sometimes your games don't even last 5 minutes. So don't go into the arena and press ERW instantly to burst. It should be you never know when you need ERW later for crucial chains or crucial IBF, etc. And if you use it for bursting, it needs to make a game-changing impact. That's how you should use ERW in PvP, in my opinion. For example, the example I gave you earlier about the Obliterate through AMS, if the DK is about to die, then sure, you can use ERW to get in 2 Obliterates through AMS, and if he dies, then it's definitely worth to use ERW in this situation. Generally, you should also think about trading cooldowns. If you get bubble out of someone by pressing ERW, then it's also probably worth to use it. If you think you can force the bubble without having to use ERW, then you should probably hold it for a kill moment. That's why I find myself holding ERW as long as possible against Prec teams specifically, because it's more about how much procs do I get from Killing Machine, how much procs does the Prec Parla get for healing, and sometimes I get really lucky and the Prec Parla gets unlucky, then I kill him without even using ERW. But I don't know if I would have gotten the procs, right? So it might be good to save up on ERW if you needed to kill him, if you got unlucky. Okay, what else is important about Frost? As your pet, you only pretty much use your raise stat when you're about to Death Pact also. Your pet is not permanent as Frost DK. It is up for 1 minute and it pretty much does what it wants. It doesn't have a pet bar. So you only use your pet when you want to Death Pact most of the time. Other than that, it's pretty much useless. And of course you need 40 Rune Power, so if I want to Death Pact, I need same as Unreal, I need 40 Rune Power, and you can sacrifice your pet to heal yourself. It has a slight delay on it to get the pet out, so it's not as easy to sack it as Unholy. You need to probably plan in a bit ahead. If you want to death pact, you should use your raise that already to be able to death pact instantly if you need it. Lichborn is pretty much the same as Unholy. You use it to break out of fears, or if you're about to get polyed, and you can also use it to heal yourself at death calls. I'm gonna show you the macro later for that. D&D is used similar to Unholy only if you want to get someone off stealth, or if you want to build Runic Power if you're not fighting in melee range right now. Okay, the last thing I should mention that is specific about Frost is of course that it's dual bidding, and your weapon enchant is going to be Razor Eyes on the main hand, Fallen Crusader on the off hand. If you would swap this around, it's not gonna make any noticeable difference, I think. Technically you will have a bit more procs from Fallen Crusader in the off hand, because your offense never miss when you do a style, but on the main hand it would have a bit higher PPMs, and in the end it's gonna even out to pretty much the same. So if you do Crusader on the main hand, you're not gonna notice a difference that it's gonna decide a game ever. So we can also do Razors on offhand. The thing that matters for Frost DK is your weapon swaps to disarm weapon and silence weapon, spell shatter, sword shatter, and you're gonna have macros of that. So let's say I would want to, I'm about to get disarmed. It's similar to Warrior and TBC. If you think you're about to get disarmed, you swap to your offhand to sword breaking, and then your disarm is only gonna last for half the duration on you. You don't want to play the whole game without sword breaking against warriors or rogues. You want to pretty much pre-swap it, and you have to use a global for it sadly if you're in fight. Let's say I'm in fight, and as you see it uses a global, and you have to predict kind of when he disarms you. That's a good use case though, because disarm really hurts us, because we're melee striking with frost strikes a lot, so you should try to get this done. The macro to have both weapons back again is equip slot 16, equip slot 17, and the macro to have weapon slot for disarm is equip slot 17, and then you write the name of the weapon you enchanted, right, with sword shatter. For spell shatter it's similar, just write the name of the weapon which has this spell breaking weapon enchantment on it, and this is also useful if you play against casters who also want to silence you to kill you. It can be really game saving if you have spell breaking on you to not get a full duration silence, so you can get off your MS in time. And yeah, there's another macro if you want to use spell shatter and sword shatter at the same time. It's not going to happen that often, but if you're facing shatter or mage rogue for example, then it could be useful to have both of them at least for some time. Then you're going to write the 16, 17, and just, I think you get the hang of it, you just add the names to the weapons you want to swap. And then if you want to swap back, then you're just going to use your old macro, make separate binds for these so you can juggle around all your weapons as you wish basically. It's not too important, so if you just starting out with Frost DK and this is giving you a headache, it's really min-max to be honest, except maybe sparing, because if you think you're about to get silence and you're going to eat a full silence and you're going to dive without aiming, that's kind of sucks. And yeah, if you're facing warriors or rogues and you're about to get disarmed, if you have enough practice already, you should try to swap weapons before a disarm, because it's going to help you a lot to do more damage. And then you need to remember to swap it back right after the disarm. If you play the warrior in TBC, it's pretty much the same stuff for sword shatter, except that you have spell shatter as well in Wrath as a DK. Alright, another macro that is pretty much exclusive for Frost. If you want to dismiss your pet, you cannot do /pet dismiss, because your race stat is not talented and your ghoul is not a real pet with a pet bar, so we will have to use this macro it's pretty much similar to totems. So if you would right click your frame up here, if someone pet, it appears out here, right? If you right click it, it's gonna disappear, and the macro just does the same. You pretty much want to use this macro when you either got your pet out by accident, or if you thought you will need Death Pact, but you didn't really need it. And let's say a paladin is farming mana on your pet, then you should dismiss it this way. And of course, if you have Hungering Code on someone and your pet is gonna run to him, if you're in combat, the pet is gonna start taking this target and you cannot control it. So this is when you dismiss it with the macro. You should have a macro to be able to, if needed, press your blood tap and your unbreakable armor at the same time. And I also put my ration in it and your trinkets, because sometimes you will, it's similar to PvE, right? If you play Frost DK in PvE, you will know why you need this macro. It's it can be useful sometimes to sync these two abilities to always ensure you'll be able to press your unbreakable armor. But I also have a separate bind for unbreakable armor. If you don't need to blood tap, you can also, I advise you to do both, bind the macro for blood tap unbreakable armor and for unbreakable armor alone. Then your death shield, you can also macro your death shield with your racial. So, and if you're human, platinum disc of battle, just a small thing there, but this way you don't have to press 2 buttons when you're bursting, so you will press death shield and it's pretty much gonna be 99% of the time it's gonna be useful to use death shield together with your other big damage cooldowns. You should have a macro for icy touch also, like let's say this is my focus, this is my target. Then you can icy touch focus, because as I mentioned earlier, the slow, if somebody spam this spell like crazy, so I use focus icy touch macro. You can also use arena 1-2 icy touch macro if you really want to mix it. And that the macros are similar to Anomaly, for example Lichborn with Death Call. It's going to be your self-healing macro to Death Call yourself whenever you need healing. It's not a difference between Anomaly there. There is one really useful macro if you're facing an Anomaly decay. Doesn't matter which spec you are, this is a good macro in general. And it makes you basically kick Corpse Explode without having to target the ghoul. And it's a really useful macro to be able to save your healer from Corpse Explosion. Just bind it to a good keybind where you feel comfortable using it. If I play BGs, I have rocket boots, and this is usually if I play arena, I just put the bind on there. It's a good bind for me to be able to kick really fast the pet. Maybe one other thing, I'm playing around with it right now. It can be really annoying if you have to retarget someone to kill their totems, and it's gonna be easy for a shaman to notice that you're killing his cleansing totem, which is gonna be really important for you to kill as Frost Decay. So you can make mouse over macros for Death Call, Icy Touch, maybe even Blood Strike and Plague Strike. I'm playing around with it at the moment. And you'll be able to be hitting these totems with mouse over them without him noticing that you killed the totem. But it's really like min-max, and I didn't really use it right now. I'm just messing around with it right now. Same with Death Call, it can be nice to target someone else and then mouse or Death Call the totem. Because for Frost it's gonna matter more than for Anomaly. You don't have mouse or pet attack, right? So you need to make maybe Death Call or Icy Touch, something like that, to kill the totem. Can be another useful thing. If you're in a party with someone playing without voice chat, you can have, for example, this macro. I'm gonna copy it real quick because I'm not in a party, so you can. So this would be in your party, right? So I'm gonna do /say now, but if you're in a party, it's gonna post the macro in the text in your party. And you will be able to announce the name of the player you're targeting to your mate. It can be pretty important for Hodge, so if your mate doesn't know what you want to Hodge, you just spam this macro and then it's gonna, maybe your party knows who you want to go on. Same for focus, it's not only for if you put in percentage F, then it will be announcing your focus, and then you can spam these macros if you're not using voice chat. But that's really all the macros which I'm using, at least, that are specific to Frost. The rest of the macro is pretty much standard stuff. Make sure to have either Arena 1-2 or focus macros for all abilities like Death Grip, Chains, Strangulate, everything basically that you need. And that's pretty much general DK tips. Yeah, you can have a macro for D&Ding insta on yourself, but that's pretty much similar to Anomaly. And I think that's it about Frost. There's not too many macros which are special for this spec. As for add-ons, I don't use too many add-ons that affect the arena. Most of the stuff I use is Weakauras. For example, the debuffs on the nameplates. I don't even use them that often anymore because in 5s it's really bothering me. It's just not that big of a deal. You can have this Weakaura or not. More important is your proc, your greatness proc Weakaura, and your killing machine proc, which I mentioned earlier. This one. And yeah, I'm gonna link them in the video description. That's the most important one to keep track as Frost, your killing machine procs. And I use Weakaura for most of the stuff in my UI. There's another Weakaura tracking enemy cooldowns. This one is really good. But you can also just use Omnibar. I use on my main, actually I use Omnibar these days. These are all the Weakauras I'm using right now. I will try to put them in the description. And yeah, here's the Death Knight's reminder Weakaura, in case you should forget to buff your horn. Also your presence. and then we go for Corpse Explosion to be able to kick it really fast with the macro I showed you earlier. If you should run out of macro space like me, especially if you play a few other classes, then it's also really useful to have Bindpad. There you will have more space, and also if you run out of space in the action bars, you can bind more stuff there. It's also an add-on I would recommend for any arena player. You might have seen me using WeaponSwingTimer in one of my videos. I was using this add-on earlier to show you the killing machine procs, to visualize how this works. But to be honest, in arena you don't want to watch it too much. You don't really want to hold your global to maybe get a killing machine proc from your auto attack. It's quite the opposite actually. You want to maybe even hold your killing machine proc to use it in a good burst opportunity. And yeah, your global cooldown is going to be 1 second with unrepresents, and if you don't get the proc from your auto attack, then you're kind of griefed. If you want to get used to how fast your auto attacks are as Frost DK and maybe min-max a few swings and killing machine procs, feel free to use it, but it's definitely not one of the first things to focus on if you understood how killing machine works. Because as I said, your auto attacks are super fast, as is your global cooldown, and you don't really want to hold your globals 90% of the time. Another important add-ons, as I said, I'm going to link all of them in the description. Not sure if I have to talk about all of them in detail. Gladdy is of course mandatory and really good, or Sarena. You shouldn't play arena without Gladdy or Sarena. Diminish is also really useful to see your own DRs. One really good add-on is MagicRunes. You can use this add-on to see your rune bars more in the center of the screen. Normally I have it also in the middle of my screen. Right now I have it here, because I use this Weakauras for PvE and it's interfering, and I don't want to have this enabled at the same time. But normally I have it on the same place in the middle of the screen, just to be able to track your runes, right? It's a really good thing to be able to see runes easier. LoseControl is really good to be able to see your own CCs, and also if you do Runic Power, for example, it's going to show the freeze on the target on the nameplates. Actually, there's one thing if you should use LoseControl, which I definitely recommend to use. By default, this root settings is put to 0 for whatever reason, and to the priority, and to see roots at all, you should put it to like 10 or something. So this way you will see the roots on yourself. It's kinda useful. And it's a bit similar with OmniCD. There you will have all your party members cooldowns. It's a really useful add-on as well. And you will have to adjust some cooldowns, the cooldown timer, because the add-on does not count for talents. So if your party specs into reduced Hodge cooldown, for example, then you would need to adjust this timer by 20 seconds. And you do this in the spell editor by just adding the spell ID, and then you literally just change the timer and that's it. That's all you have to do. I use my buffs a bit more off the top with Leatrix Plus. That's not self-explanatory, maybe you need to find the settings in the add-on. You go to run layer plus, then you go to frames, manage buffs, and there you can move your buffs around. That's pretty nice to have. But yeah, other than that, I mean, add-on is personal preference. There's not really much specific to Frost or DK in general, except the Rune add-on and the proc add-on for your killing machine procs. To round off the guide, I will show a few more clips of Frost DK in action. I try to include all the frequently asked questions along the guide, and I will try to answer some of them that are left, while also showing some gameplay examples and some of the tips and tricks. As you can see in this clip, I think I even used Obliterate on Frostfeaver, which is not too big of a deal. Most of the time, one disease is enough to obliterate, because it's not PvE. Your disease is gonna get dispelled, and the most important thing about Obliterate is that it gives you a really fast Runic Power in a short burst window and does okay-ish damage. People are stressing too much about, oh, disease get dispelled and I cannot obliterate. Yeah, most of the time it's important to have Frostfeaver on the target and Frost Strike, ideally Killing Machine Frost Strike. If you're unlucky, then you will have to follow up with non-Killing Machine Frost Strikes and hope they are critting. And you can weave in either Howling Blast or Obliterate based on the enemy armor. But don't be afraid to use Obliterate when the target has only Frostfeaver. It's not that much damage difference in PvP as in PvE. And of course, if your diseases get dispelled too much and you're not close to killing, then you should mix in the opener, the build-up rotation with Chains, Plague Strike anyway, So you're not gonna get to Obliterate that much anyway. You should mainly keep your Frostfeaver up and the Blood Plague as a protection for both of these. I got asked this question a lot, when do you Obliterate, when do you Howling Blast, and there's just too many variables to give a general answer for that. And as I explained to you earlier, the basic rule of thumb is Obliterate on low armor, Howling Blast on high armor. But then again, you could also Obliterate a plate if you're expecting a disarm, for example, so you still have your Howling Blast cooldown. On top of that, if people are hodged, it can be good to Obliterate even with high armor, because they are not able to dodge anything and your Obliterate has quite a high crit chance from your talents. But it's a bit of a gamble. If your Obliterate is going to crit, it's going to do more even on plates. If it doesn't crit, then you're probably going to do not a lot of damage. And also if people are not stunned, then it's even more of a gamble to use Obliterate on plates, because they can dodge and parry a lot. So it's, as I said, it's quite of a gamble. This is an example where I definitely also would use Obliterate even though the target has high armor. If it's a DK himself or DK's teammate with AMZ or AMS, you're gonna be able to either finish him off completely and kill him, or at least do somewhat significant damage while his AMS or AMZ is lasting, and you can follow up that pressure which you generated in that moment. And it's better than doing nothing for these long seconds which is anti-magic cooldowns are lasting. So there you see, it's really so highly dependent on the situation. If you think you will get kited, I also like to Obliterate often, as long as I can, and then if people get out of range, I like to follow up with Howling Blast instead. So it can be useful to save your Howling Blast for another situation. You can see how Chillblains and Chains actually stack up, but that's not the case in Classic anymore. So I feel like it's especially important to have the Chillblains and separate Icy Touch, also Arena 1-2 focus, Icy Touch bound. And if you look at this priest, he would definitely get away from me by holding down that dispel button. And also for Holy Palace together with Violence talent, it's a bit easier. It's still a gamble for you, but you have a chance to slow them down more efficiently. So people would have, especially priests, would have to alternate between the disease cleansing and the magical cleansing. But even then you still have your 30% chance to resist dispel, which can come in really clutch. And for Holy Palace it's same, they only have to hold down one button, but even then it's gonna break up their rhythm too. And at some point they're not gonna be able to afford trying to dispel for a 30% chance. They're gonna fall behind a lot, especially as you have the Unholy Presence. So this talent is really crucial, I think, together with Violence. Otherwise I would have stopped playing Frost Spec by now. If it wasn't for Violence and Chillblains, it would be like zero fun right now. But these two mechanics together, I think it still makes it kind of playable for us. And as I said earlier, people are overvaluating dispel against Frost Decay way too much. If you would play against me and you would try to dispel every disease, good luck with that. You would fall behind so much on healing, and then you would get frozen at even lower HP. And then there is no, trust me, there's no time for Holy Palace trying to start dispelling. At some point you need to start trying to heal. The key point is to get at this moment, right? As Frost Decay. And then if you're also in execute phase from your talents, that's where it starts getting spicy. Yes, dispel disease can be really annoying, but it's not that big of a deal as people think. I can only stress this one more time. But yeah, Frost Decay was a lot stronger on private servers against comps like Warpal, for example, and Palis in general, who would dispel your chains and then 100% still have the Chillblains and would need to dispel another time into the 30% resistance. It made Frost Decay kinda really strong to slow down enemies, and especially against plates and Palis it was really nice this way, and was kind of a strong desecration alternative for Frost Decay. The way it's working right now in Classic is not, at most it's a budget desecration right now on live servers, but yeah, it is what it is and we have to deal with it like this. Here's another example how I freeze Warpal, and then while my Pali is still on his way, he has to use globals for healing, maybe coming on his way, covering distance, and you can use this time to get your chains off on the freeze. It will not break your freeze unless you, except if you would use the Glyph, which you don't want to use, the Chains of Ice Glyph, you don't want to use this as Frost Decay. So you can get some Runic Power instead of doing nothing while you wait for your Pali. If you would be playing with a Priest, for example, this would also be fine while he's dispelling the shields of the targets, etc. It's also always good to get in some chains to pull up that Runic Power. Except if this would be a close target, as I talked about earlier, if then you might want to hold your runes for obliterates. Let's say maybe a priest who's completely clean, then you maybe should not do this, but a lot of times it can be good to pool Runic Power while you wait for your mate to come. One thing about Hungry and Cold, it's a bit scuffed when you grip someone and they are not exactly on the floor, but let's say 1 millimeter in the air. It can happen that your Hungry and Cold misses. You need to be a bit more patient on Classic to really have both his feet on the ground, otherwise you might get it might not register for some reason. And I have this problem a lot because it's not my muscle memory to not be able to freeze instantly. It's also kind of it's also kind of scuffed because it gives people time to react to the freeze and maybe press AMS or another spell which could grieve my Hungry Cold. But yeah, you should be aware of this. As you can see right here, it was clearly in range, but it didn't register because I was not patient enough. Really useful trick, and it might seem a bit scummy, but I'm 100% sure that this is Blizzard in the end. Mages also have these. If their barrier breaks, they will get frozen through the pillar. And this is one of the few upsides we have in Classic, because on Private Server this was not working. And I would rather switch it around and take the other stuff back and not be able to do this, because I'm also not used to doing this, to be honest. But I think if you play Frost, you're already like kind of off meta, so you should feel free to use this. It's not a crazy bug as people think, because as I said, mages can also do this, and makes you able to ignore loss. As long as you're in range, you can freeze enemies through the pillar, and it can be really helpful if they're pilling too much or going to line too much to get a good go on them. As you can see here, I froze up the whole pile right when they were trying to run away. Rune Strike is another really situational ability, and I didn't mention it in rotation because, as I said, it's highly situational again. There's a lot of stuff in PvP, but it can be still, I wouldn't take it off the bars, it can be still useful, especially against hunters. You can maybe kill them through deterrence, and as you have a quite high attack speed as FrostDK, you will also be able to get more Rune Strikes off. You can see me here absolutely demolishing this hunter through deterrence with Rune Strike, but that's one of the rare use cases where this can come in really clutch. I wouldn't worry about Rune Strike too much, just put it on the bind where you feel comfortable with it. And so we can press if, like in a situation like this, it's mainly going to be hunters, or if you have really a lot of Runic Power and you're about to trying to kill someone, then you can Rune Strike at the same time you're pressing Frost Strikes or other strikes. Most of the time though, you don't want to do this. Definitely don't macro this in your abilities, because Frost Strikes give, especially Killing Machine Frost Strikes, will give you a lot of more value than Rune Strike. So if you press Rune Strike too often, you will end up having not enough Runic Power to spam these Frost Strikes to finish someone off. So as I said, highly situational. Keep this in mind to maybe use it in a situation like this. Don't worry about it too much. In general, you're not going to swap around presence too much, except if you're heavily focused. Then you can go to Frostbands, of course, especially against physical DPS. You probably need to do this a bit more often as FrostDK, as Unruly, because you're not as tanky. And it's also not hurting us that much because you gain probably like 100 or 200 attack power while doing this. Most of the time, of course, you still want to be in 100% because of a faster global cooldown. What you can do though is, if some target is really low HP, and especially if you have frozen them, you will have time, right? You can go to Blood Presence and try to finish them off with the last strike if you think it's going to kill the target, or yeah, mainly should be a kill, because otherwise then he's going to maybe recover and then you're behind again with a low global cooldown. So I find myself doing this most of the time, as you can see here on this priest. Most of the time I will swap to Blood Presence to finish the target off with a Killing Machine Frost Strike. It's the best case to use this. And you get 15% extra damage for free, because you need a Blood Rune of course, but you mostly will have Blood Runes. But it doesn't use an extra global. The presence swap is on a different global than your other global cooldowns, so you can, if you want to min-max this, you can try this trick to, maybe it will secure the kill. If it's 50% more damage on that high crit, can be really useful. To be honest, if I'm rewatching my own videos, I find myself doing Obliterate, especially Death Chill Obliterate Burst, a lot more than I probably should do. It's in my muscle memory from private servers, because Death Chill and Killing Machine used to consume each other's buffs, so to say. So if you would, let's say you would use Death Chill and then get a proc from Killing Machine and try to Frost Strike, they would get consumed. But in Classic you can use your Death Chill without having to worry about getting a KM proc, completely ruining it, so you could use your Death Shield more on Frost Strike if you're against plates. At this point I can only say thank you for watching. I hope this video was of any help for you if you want to start on your Frost journey. If it was the case, you can feel free to subscribe for free or give the video a like. I put many hours into this. I will also try to stream some FrostDK games on Twitch, or there's only a handful of Palas at Myanmar which are willing to play this with a FrostDK, if they could also play with a Warrior or Unholy instead. But hey, maybe next season we're gonna see more FrostDKs. There's still a solid amount of Wrath left to play, and maybe in the winter there will be also more time and more pools of Palas to play with. If you're a Paladin and you see this, don't hesitate to play the FrostDK with Death's Verdict or Death's Choice and Lich King heroic weapons. It can be a big pumper com and a fun com for sure. And that's pretty much the last thing I can say to help out my fellow FrostDKs out there. Good luck and have fun if you try it out. See you in the arena.